Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Eightfold Path to Liberate Free using the 8 new ICF Core Competencies. My name is Siri, and I'm the Director for Innermost Shift Coach Training. This Eightfold Path to Liberate Free and using these 8 ICF Core Competencies is a journey to spread awareness of the impact of these core competencies, not only in the coaching, but also in this new world normal, and how conscious use of these competencies can create a remarkable difference in our everyday life. In this endeavor, we have partnered with the outstanding MCC coaches who will take us through a journey of how applying these new ICF core competencies can really help the coaches to be more present, to listen differently, to raise the engagement level with the clients, and even much more. So today we have with us Dinah Ideus, a master certified coach. Dinah has a master's in organizational behavior and executive coaching. She's currently leveraging her coaching in management, in DEI, and leadership development experiencing through supporting the leaders in education, technology, finance, and healthcare. Dinah began coaching and mentor coaching and managing coaches at Inside Track, an educational services firm that provide coaching and consulting to colleges and universities. After building a sustainable coaching program with Inside Track, Dinah coached, consulted, and built leadership development content at EV Core Healthcare. Dinah currently coaches and consults with businesses to support their financial stability and growth, and mentor coaches for International Coach Federation. Hawthorne Union was founded by Dinah, and she named it after the foundation locations where she learned to coach. Created with an intent to support ongoing coach and professional development, Hawthorne Union provides executive and professional coaching, management consulting, and sales coaching, and also training for leaders, as well as mentor coaching, coach supervision, and continuing education approved by International Coaching Federation. And everyone at Hawthorne Union holds the belief that people are the heart of every business. Very true. Taking care of those people is what enables them to take care of the businesses. And Dinah is also an author of the book, Listen, Mentor Coaching for Coaches. So welcome, Dinah, today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Would you like to say something?
I'm just happy to be here and want to wish everybody a happy International Coaching Week. I'm so thankful for the efforts that coaches make to listen and support each other, especially in these challenging times for our world. So it's such an important profession, and so thankful whether you are a coach or learning coaching skills or being coached, that we are leaning into community and supporting each other at this time.
Wonderful. Yes, I think that's really incredible. All the coaches doing a great job. So, Dinah, today we have one of the competencies which we'll talk about is listening actively in the coaching sessions and beyond. So if you would like to share some of your coaching work, some of your coachings that you have done, maybe a few cases if you can share with us.
Absolutely. So what I found as I continued to develop as a coach is that it taught me how to listen in a different way. And so being a teacher of English or literature and teaching my students to carefully look at the words that people said, talking to them about tone, it was a natural correlation into the actively listening competency. But as I studied more and learned more about coaching, there's so much, whether it's repetitive words people say or images they use, or even their tone, how their tone changes when they laugh, when they talk fast, when they talk slow. A lot of times coaches are so focused on what is the perfect question for me to ask, or how do I add value in the session? Because of course we want our clients to be able to see that value. But so much of what happens is that people will be in their own head thinking about what they're going to say, and then they're waiting to speak as opposed to just really listening and truly being present. And I guess for me, the reason that actively listening is one of my favorite is it has to do with presence. You really have to be there with the person in order to make sure that you see these nuances, because they can be quite obvious, but sometimes they're very subtle. So as far as some case studies, one of the things that I listen to is tone and how tone changes. So sometimes a client will be talking faster and sometimes they'll be slowing down. And one of the things we have to be careful as coaches is how closely we are observing and listening to them. It's an opportunity to reflect, but sometimes that reflection can be distracting. So I did have a client who I was with on Zoom, and I could see that her body language was changing. And so I was bringing that to light for her, because, when clients will look up to the side, so it's interesting, as I talk about listening, I'm also talking about seeing, right? But her body language would go up to her eyes would go up to the side while she was thinking. Sometimes clients she'll put her hands over her heart. I was pointing those things out to her, and it was actually distracting for her because she wasn't used to being on camera. And so we actually switched to phone. We switched to phone. So then instead I could just listen to the changes in her voice. And at the same time, there would still be some words or the pauses. Sometimes the tone will change. So I think that it's just a matter of asking about that. And it's not because we're supposed to know. There's already so much going on in a coaching session, but to just be able to ask and say, hey, you're talking a little faster now, or I hear a different emotion there, or it sounds like there's some emotion there for you. We don't have to label it. We don't have to know. Our role as coaches is not expertise, it's to notice, to reflect, and ask questions. Also, to use part of the reason I love listening so much is how much happens in the silence. It's important to take that breath. Sometimes coaches will ask questions too rapidly, and then we don't give our clients thinking time. If we're truly hoping to make life-changing differences in our clients' worlds and partner with them as they do that, sometimes that takes some processing time. Another example is I know one of the markers is about kind of tone changes. I asked I asked one of my clients why he laughed, and we laughed back and forth. We have that kind of rapport, but there was a moment where there was laughter as he brought something up. And when I asked him about it, I was asking just because it was a marker and I was training for MCC and I knew I was supposed to, which we're not supposed to do, but I mean, that's honest. But then his answer to why the laughter was there, because it was something about like tension or nervousness that he hadn't necessarily been aware of, and I was definitely not aware of. It really deepened the context of the call. It's almost like when at the beginning of the call you ask, and what would it mean for you if, right? They say, what do you want to talk about today? What would it be like if we talked about that thing? Okay, how would your life change? That to me is one of the things that opens that up. Sometimes when a client's tone is changing or even their body language is changing and you ask about it, there's a depth there because you're tapping into something that may be more unconscious as opposed to conscious. So another example there, and this one, even though it's listens actively, it has to do with what I saw. I had a client whose body language changed when they talked about a certain person. And as a coach, I thought, how do I not label this? I'm not looking to label this, but I want to bring awareness to this. And so I said to her, are you aware that your body language changes when you talk about that person? And she said, no, how does it change? But the thing is that in meetings, other people were seeing her body language change. This other person was seeing her body language change, but she didn't have the awareness of it. And so then once we talked through that, that was helpful, because she really closed down when she talked about that person. It's obvious. When we see someone we like, we light up. That happens with our eyes, but it also happens with our voices as well. So, it is that whole of the person. Thank you. And it's the whole of the person and looking at what can we see and notice and what might it mean beyond that. And as coaches, we don't label, but it's a matter of asking those questions.
So I think what you mentioned very wonderfully, listening is also about your coaching presence. And I think when you are in your presence, you can actually listen more actively because you give a lot of space and you give a lot of, a silence to the client so that they can speak and you can really absorb. And definitely listening is also about understanding the tone and the speed and the posture, what they make while they're talking. And when we do coaching in NLP, when somebody looks up, so what we do is, okay, so when you're looking up somewhere there, what is there actually? You can ask a question where you can actually get the insight of the person's mind, that what is actually happening there. And definitely, the active listening is also about understanding that how we can really understand the whole person. It's not just with the tone, but it's with the body, how the shift is happening. And as you said, she did not even notice that there's a shift in the posture, and people absolutely are not aware of it, that there's also a shift happening in the posture as well. So let's see this competency for a while. Just give me a minute. Okay, here we go. Yes. So it's the sixth part of the competency, which says focus on the client, what the client is saying and what the client is not saying. So fully understand what is being communicated in this context. And so, how do you do this? Sometimes when you're talking of the first part of it, it says consider client's context. Okay, context we can still understand because the client is signed up a coaching contract. It could be personal, it could be professional. What about the identity and the environment? So, how do you think you use this particular part of it in understanding the clients when the client walks to you as a part of your active listening?
Mhm. Yeah, so this is especially important also in the context of diversity, equity, inclusion, and creating trust and intimacy and the safe space for our clients. So we don't know our clients' experience, even if we may look the same or our resumes may be the same. We don't necessarily have the same experience, and they are not. Two people can experience the same event very differently, even if they come from a very similar background. So some of this is, listening actively is directly linked to the questions that we ask and the way that we show up as coaches. So even something as simple as, what do I need to know about you? Or, what else might affect our coaching engagement? Or how do I show up for you as your coach? What factors may be influencing the success of this engagement? I think one of the things to consider is if whether it feels appropriate culturally for you to be more specific. Have you been experiencing bias that we should discuss? Or are there things from a cultural context that I should be aware of in our coaching engagement? It is about making sure we're looking at that, what we call whole person, and all the different facets of the client, and really listening and being aware of those things. And it's we're not aware of what we're not aware of, and neither are they. So there is that important, it's almost like to listen actively, it's an invitation to say what could be here, and
Mhm.
make sure that we then stop speaking, because so much of listens actively is, yes, it's through observation, but it's also through silence. Even if coaches are verbal processors and they're processing while they talk, that's so many words we're pouring on our clients. It's important to stop and listen. Also, I think that for clients, so often we are the one person they share with. I mean, perhaps they have a therapist, and hopefully they have supporting community in their lives, and supporting coworkers. But there are also, in some ways, we can be the secret keepers. We're the ones that ask questions, and that's that safe space, confidential space, whether it's work related or something else. So really just creating and holding the space for that, and making sure that they don't feel like we're waiting to speak, that we're not interrupting them, and that we're asking those holistic questions is very important.
I think that's very well, wonderfully said, Diana. So, how can you make the audience understand how to understand what is not being communicated?
Mm. So sometimes you can just ask, right? It depends on how direct you are. So what's underneath that, or what isn't being said?
Mhm.
I think a lot of times we have to make sure that we don't assume. So I was just talking to one of my mentees who had an intake form about what her client wanted to cover.
Mhm.
And because she had the form, she wasn't asking as many questions. She was explaining coaching, and she was doing a great job explaining coaching. But my recommendation to her was, okay, you have this form. What else? Right? What's not on this form? What was your experience like in filling out these intake questions? So my mentor calls it the thing beneath the thing. There's often or always something beneath, and we're just kind of picking it up and looking underneath it. It's rarely, if you have weeds in your garden and you just, chop them off, they're going to come right back, right? You have to dig them up and root them out. So I think a lot of it too has to be how present and patient is the coach to believe that there's something underneath and that it's worth listening for, looking for. But then there's a interesting balance when it comes to listening actively of curiosity and patience, because the curiosity drives you forward to continue to ask those questions, but there has to be enough patience and space for your client to truly kind of breathe. That, if you're rushing them, okay, what else? Okay, what now? Like, that's not listening actively either.
I think a very beautiful metaphor, that if you have weeds, if you just chop them up, they will grow again. So you have to dig deeper. So you have to dig in the mind of the client at times deeper. Another question, when you're listening actively, but sometimes you get these clients when they're speaking and speaking and speaking and speaking, then what do you do? They're speaking too fast, and then what do you do? How do you handle that?
Yeah, so I think that's a challenge too, right? Because how we show up in the coaching session, we have these things we're trying to do as coaches, but then there's also different ways that our clients show up. So if you don't get that much airtime, if you don't get the microphone a lot, then it's even more important that you have been listening carefully, not to all of the details, but then getting down to this kind of the fifth and the sixth. So listening to the tone and body language to determine that full meaning, because especially if they're giving you a lot of detail and it's perhaps technical detail or about all these people you don't know, it's not important. We're not consulting here,
Yeah.
right? We're not trying to fix them. We
How do you
see.
do? So what do you tell the client, because I've faced this few times when the client is just talking and they're talking all around the world. And, so
Yeah.
what do you do with that? Then what do you tell the client that time? How do you handle it?
Yeah, so I leave some space for it, right? For them to talk all around the world, and because I'm listening to them, but it's not about, there's no quiz after, right? But then I will sometimes say to the client, I'm going to pause you there. I try not to interrupt the client. One of the previous markers was, doesn't interrupt the client unless there's a stated purpose to do so. So, it is something where you have to be listening very carefully to know, is pausing going to break their flow? Now, if and when someone starts to repeat, so if it's something that's stressful to them or related to kind of some of the harder emotions, whether it's anger or venting, people will tend to loop. That is where I pause the client, and I will say something like, I'm going to pause you here because this seems like it has a lot of emotion. And then I ground back in what the session agreement is. So I'm going to pause you here. It seems like this has a lot of emotion. You mentioned that today that you wanted to cover this. How are we tracking on time? Or, if they've just come in and it's all of this information and it's hard to keep track of, before we get too deep in the session, I'm going to pause you here so we can determine what you really want to focus on today. What do you want to be able to take away from this session? I think also number 6 is very important because it is noticing trends. This may be a client who just says a lot. I have some clients who talk a lot of the time. I like my clients in general to have it be 80-20. So they're speaking 80% of the time, I'm speaking 20%. There are some of my clients who are 90-10 or even 95-5, right? But it's a matter of knowing, is this how the client shows up? So when I'm coach, I do use it as processing time. I talk a lot more when I'm in the client seat as opposed to the coach seat. So, I think you can also call that out as a theme. So and then also be checking in and asking our clients to say, you're sharing a lot here. how has this been helpful for you? Or, I would like to ask you a question or make a reflection. You can ask for permission, or you can, I step in with, I'm going to pause you there.
Hmm. I think that's very well said, because many of the new coaches, it's very difficult for them to suddenly say a word that stop, it's enough you have said, you're talking all around, but it's not the real issue. So I think very beautifully said that. I'm going to pause you here. I think it's got a lot of emotion, and let's see what the session is here for. I think very, very well said. So looking into this competency, Diana, yes, coaching, definitely it is, coaching is all about listening, listening, listening. And it reminds me of one of my clients, and he was a businessman who came up to me and he says, so we had a contract, that for 1 year, and he said, Siri, I need 2 hours. And we had a 1 hour contract that every 15 days he would come and, have a session. I said, okay, that's okay. So he said, but I need 2 hours. I said, okay, double the fee. He said, I'm ready to pay. I said, okay. He says, 1 hour I will talk and you will listen, and 1 hour you will coach me. I said, okay, done.
Oh.
1 hour, like he would come, and of course, I would also pick up many things, many cues, what he was talking, and his whole energy shifted and how it happens. But then he would just talk about everything in the world, which he could not talk anywhere, probably,
Yeah.
After 1 year
People want to be heard.
absolutely,
I mean, that's so much of what coaching is, that it's that space that people can be heard.
Absolutely. And
but good for him for articulating, hey, I will double
and the next part of the story, you will even like it more, and everybody in the audience would also, and then one day he says, would you like to meet my wife? I said, it's okay, if he wants, he's most welcome. So then he got his wife, and we were sitting and talking, and says, how's he doing? Yeah, he's doing very well. And then she says, ma'am, I have one complaint. I said, please. So he doesn't talk at home. So I was like, okay, that's okay. I had no words to tell her, because she was just sitting right, and he was sitting right in front of me. I said, okay. So I said, yeah, I'm going to talk to him. Don't worry about it. So that he goes back home and also shares things with you.
How fascinating. Well, and that's the other thing to know too, right? Is the way that the client is showing up for us, the trusted space of a coach, is not necessarily the way that they're showing up for others. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, I work with executives as a last resort before termination. So oftentimes we're looking at what is determined as toxic behavior or overbearing. And so there's a way that they listen and interact and engage with me that so much of then it's trying to say, okay, this is not how other people are interpreting you. What do you need to say differently? How does your body language need to be different in order to impact this? So, listening actively, it's also knowing how they can take that with them, right? And be able, so much of leadership is related to communication. It's related to executive presence. You could watch a presentation on leadership. You can watch a presentation that's not in the language you speak, and you can tell from the person's body language and how they're engaging the room, how much executive presence they are, and how charismatic they are, and how effective they are. So that's another thing when we think about listening actively. Yes, you're listening to the words and you're listening for the metaphors and the repeated words, but also the kind of the whole person, or the body language and the tone beyond that, is something you can usually tell when someone walks in a room how confident they are. That's part of this competency.
Absolutely. So do you think you have, Diana, you can share some example when listening actively actually helped the client to change the whole perception, or improve a life-changing, thing for the client when you were listening actively? So if you have some example, you can share with that.
Yeah, so there's a subtlety in the language that, can really open things up. So one of the call that I actually did for my MCC exam, my client was talking about what they said was the relationship between their relationship to pricing their services as a coach. And so one of the questions I asked is, you know, so you said the word relationship.
Yeah.
And that actually really kind of opened it up. And then we used the metaphor of the relationship as we went. And it was actually, it's one thing to talk about pricing and pricing your services. People have a lot of shame and anxiety around money and what they charge for their services. At the same time, if we look at it as a relationship and look at it as a give and take, then it ended up being a session on a different level. I think also that call had a lot of silence in it. So what would happen is that I knew that she was processing. This woman speaks very fast.
Mm,
She's a very fast talker, very fast walker,
mm,
and this session was not that way. So it had big gaps while she was processing or potentially taking notes, and it wasn't on video. I couldn't see her. It was just a matter of knowing that she would speak to me again when she was ready. So I think some of it too, we have to be we have to be present for when things shift, right? You can have expectations, normally she would be one that talks very fast and would probably be hard for people to keep up with because she's firing so quickly. Um, so then I would argue that the shift in that is even more important to make space for when she's listening and processing. If you have a client that is very quiet and they come and they are talking a lot, yes, some of that can be the trust that you've built, but it could also be that something is bothering them, or so just not making assumptions and asking questions to say, hey, there's a shift here. What does that mean? And I think the thing is I know you're asking about specific examples. I think the reason that I'm giving maybe these smaller examples is because this is really braided into all of my sessions. And, sometimes I will say, even when I've been coached, so very early in my coaching career, my colleague was doing an exercise, and we were just completing the exercise for our coaching class. And she said to me, it sounds like space is very important to you, like the word space. And I was like, oh, it is. It is. How did you know? And she said, well, you said it like 6 times. So there's a way that we don't even listen to ourselves. And then specifically when I have one person that coaches me, as he trains and works on his portfolio, it's he'll always catch what I call repetitive words, right? Because we say a word multiple times, it usually has meaning in our context, in our map of the world. And he'll always say words to me that I've said, and I'm like, that doesn't sound familiar. That doesn't resonate with me. And I believe him, though. I know that he's not making it up. And then what'll happen is I'll say it multiple times after that. So there's a way that we don't even listen to ourselves the way coaches listen. And that's actually the premise for my book, is that no one listens like coaches listen. So there's just, it's I think it's hard because listening isn't necessarily like the superhero story. Like, I listened and this happened, but it
mm.
it's ever present. It's that everyday hero, right? It's ever present in how we listen. And then also, I think that what people find is also listening really changes their personal and professional relationships as well. It goes beyond coaching.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in NLP, we understand that people give cues. So when they are in specific mode, maybe you're listening to them, you're matching the visual with the visual predicates and auditory with the auditory one, and so it's something where you can actually be with them, and that also becomes a part of listening when you're just being with them using the same kind of modality and helping them to even explore much more. It reminds me, I was coaching one of the CEOs, and I was doing the foundation session with him, and asked him some questions, and then he was taking a lot of time and insights, and he was talking and talking, and suddenly, it just kind of, he suddenly realized that I never thought that I have so much of potential within myself, and something magic you've done. I said, okay, it's magic for you. You have done the magic yourself. It was just the space which was given to him, and I think when something like that happens, it's more of realization what people get into by just giving them that space and that silence, what you mentioned. It creates a lot of potential for them to even understand that how much potential they have, and so we also talk about, that how, okay, tell me something about your book first. What's in the book? You authored a book, right? Okay.
Yes. So it's a coffee table book. So it's all visual.
Uh-huh.
And then it has different concepts related to listening, and also just from 15 years of coaching poured into this little book. But it's designed to be like a fortune cookie, so that once you read it once through, you can open it up and see the different things. So one of the pages is called Wait, which stands for why am I talking? And that one is related to silence, right? Because so often, people fill the space. They fill the space with chatter. So another page is related to silence is golden, right? And so there's just different conceptual elements that I have in there related to, it was things that I was repeating over and over again for my mentees, and I wanted them to have some kind of visual. So one of the pages I showed in a mentor coach session yesterday was dancers, and it's about anchoring back to the client agreement, the coaching agreement. So even though this is listens actively, it is related to all the other competencies and the importance of establishing and maintaining agreements and how we do that in the session. It's like being a dance partner. So you can go in saying, okay, this is a waltz. It's okay if it changes to a tango, but you have to partner with your client so you're not stepping on each other's feet. And you have to ask, hey, we started as a waltz. Do you still want a waltz, or have we switched to tango? And it's not up for us to say, it is up for us to notice and ask, and then also listen to their response. So it was a lot of fun. It was one of my quarantine endeavors to really produce that, but it's exciting to be able to have these concepts that have shaped me as a coach and that I know have helped my mentees to be able to share those with others. And then listening is so important to me. As you know, the book is called Listen. And then, I know we're transitioning in the PCC markers and the updated core competencies, but one of the things is that the previous markers, there's something like 6 or 7 markers that are specifically about silence, right? Coach does not interrupt client. Coach gives client space and time to think, open-ended questions, with appropriate amount of pause and timing. So much of, I think, when people think listens actively, there can still be that automatic, oh, I'm supposed to listen actively so I get it right. But there needs to be more of a listening actively and then allowing for silence and then seeing what unfolds.
Absolutely. I think it's really wonderfully what you have said. So let's just talk about how active listening we will actually help us in our day-to-day life. Coaching, definitely yes, but then looking into the present scenario with this new world normal, right? So what do you think? Listening actively, how can it help people to improve their lives if we can really implement it?
Yeah. I mean, I think this goes everywhere. I think I believe coaching makes us better people. I mean, you don't coach people without their consent. There's no stealth coaching, right? But I think coaches makes us better humans, makes us better leaders, makes us better at sales. What I find in my relationships, especially relationships, people that I've known my whole life, sometimes, especially if we have a different view or perspective, the ability to listen is a way of validating and honoring a perspective that we don't necessarily share. And so, one of the things that came up for me in my path to master coach was I'm a very positive person. And so I can usually get away with my agenda a little bit because it's for positive and it's for good. But I have to make sure that I'm not rushing the client or not kind of unintentionally devaluing their ability to look at, hey, this is broken. And so actually something in my personal life, what I've seen, and a coach reflected this back to me, what I've seen in my personal life is just being able to listen to the trends and say them without judgment. So instead of, rushing, I'm not saying who this person is, but there's a, significant person in my life who it would be easy to be like, hey, why are you being so hard on yourself? Just, look at the positive. Saying something like that a coach would say, it sounds like you're, it sounds like you have this drive and you feel like that you're not meeting expectations, right? To have it just be neutral, something I would say to a client, even though this is an important relationship in my life. And then just seeing how that lands, because then that person feels kind of heard and honored, even though the follow up is not necessarily a question about the coaching engagement. The follow up is maybe something that I respond to based on our personal relationship.
Absolutely. I think, and if we implement this particular competency of listen actively even at our homes with the situations happening, and we really start valuing and the beliefs of the others where they're coming from. Probably it can help people to have much better relationships. They can be much better parents, they can be much better spouses, they can create a much better world. Whatever we are going through, at least we can have some more harmony and peace at home and in the various houses and organizations where you become much more active in listening and really listening from the heart. I think for me, one of the components is just not listening actively, but listening actually from the heart, as if the person is right there in front of you and just there meant for you. That's it, right? So I think very, very wonderfully said, Diana. Really appreciate it. So what do you think, what would be one of your messages that you would like to give to the new coaches? Because when the new coaches are there, it's more also about the mind, so they have their own mind, they have their own perception. So even if the client is talking, that they are listening and they're also going on in the mind, what to say next, what to do next, and what's going to be the answer. So what do you have to tell to these new coaches?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the core at the core of coaching for the International Federation Coaching Federation is that the client is resourceful and whole. And so it's not, some of this is about coaching presence, but it's also, bigger than that. It's the heart of it, right? We're not there to fix. We're there to partner. We're there to hold up a mirror and hold up the mirror for a different angle. So and this was a hard lesson for me as a coach, especially coming from a consulting background. So this is not to say consulting is not useful, because consulting and mentoring and teaching and expertise all have their place, but it's truly listening into your coach education to then learn how to listen as a coach. And if you're listening to fix it, you're not listening to the client. And we all have that in our lives too. There are people in our personal lives where we just want to share something and be heard, or maybe get support, and they're trying to give us advice, and people don't usually take advice. So it's amazing how much that happens. So I think it's truly the track telling you, how do I ask the perfect thing or say the perfect thing? Like that's in the coach's head. That's part of being a new coach. Let me normalize that. But I would say that new coaches overall vastly devalue silence, that your client will likely be more uncomfortable in the silence than you are, and they will break it. And what I say in the book is, what they say after the silence is often worth waiting for, that it will help them buy in. So silence is golden. Wait, why am I talking? Be very intentional with your words. I call it 80-20. I like the client to be talking 80% of the time and the coach 20. That is an aspirational goal. So it's important for clients to see what their current is. If they're new coaches, it may even be 70-30, right? So to see what's your baseline, what's your current state, and then how do you move towards that desired state. But also there's a page in one of the pages in the book has a bread box. And what I say is that if we're not listening, we miss the breadcrumbs and sometimes the bread boxes that our clients are leaving us. So much, a lot of coaches are looking for the perfect question. My questions are very generic. What would it be like if? What would you like to cover today? What changes would you notice? What support do you need? I ask very generic questions, but then I personalize it with their language. And you can't personalize if you're not listening. You mentioned the word this. What's coming up for you? When you talk about this, you light up. And you don't even have to ask a question after that. You can kind of just even stop there. So much of what we need to support our clients' change, they will give to us. It's a receptive relationship. It doesn't mean that our opinions and our thoughts don't matter. There are a place for those. But I feel like in coaching, we really have to we're trying to have the client in the driver's seat.
Absolutely.
I hope that wasn't too much. That was probably a lot.
It's perfectly said, because you're very correct. Training, mentoring, consulting, everything has its own place. Coaching is beautiful and listening is golden, and silence is even wonderful, And if you can create that space in your own mind with the silence and definitely with the curiosity and then asking the right questions, it can create a wow effect in a whole coaching scenario. Thank you so much, Diana. I think that was so beautiful. Thank you all the audiences for being here, listening to us, and become much more aware, listen more intently, listen more actively, be with them, And I think that's all for today. So thank you so much once again, Diana, for being with us.
Thank you. And, in closing, listen to each other, right? Like, this isn't just about our work, this is about our world. This is a very challenging time in the world, where generations or different countries or cultures don't necessarily agree. And at the heart of that, if we can ultimately listen and not just listen to respond or listen to argue, but truly listen and be present with someone else's perspective, there's healing beyond the medical healing that we need in this world, and listening is part of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very, very beautifully said. Very beautifully said.
Thank
Very,
you so
thank
much
you
for
so
having
much.
me.
Thank you so much.